You're. Ah, there you are.
Better.
Yep. I'm gonna be multitasking this time.
All right. So I get half your attention. I'll take that. It's probably pretty good. Change my window
Are
size.
we live yet?
Yeah, oh yeah, we've been live for minutes.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, by we, I mean there's been music playing and a splash screen for minutes. But it's okay. There are no viewers anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, we're waiting for Mehdi then, I think.
Correct.
Yeah. Should we start discussing something, anything?
Yeah, how this feels like a Friday. It
Feels
absolutely
like
does not.
Friday?
Honestly, it's felt like Friday several days this week. Maybe I've been checked out like it's Friday for several days this week. I'm not sure.
Uh, I don't like days are just like a passing blurry things for me
That's
nowadays.
fair. I guess since COVID, it's all basically an ongoing random day that whatever. And it's April Fool's too. So have you seen any good tech ones so far?
No. This morning it's really like yeah, opening up the computer and go straight to work basically. So
Yasirah, that sounds like miserable, and you need to prioritize gags and jokes. Hey, Mehdi.
yeah. So about COVID, do you get your first COVID vaccine yet?
No, not yet. It's Friday, so tomorrow. I guess the real Friday.
Tomorrow. Okay, yeah, that's good then. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're excited, as excited as you can be, I guess, to get a shot. It's silly when that's like an exciting thing these days. You're like, oh my god, I found the vaccine somewhere. Like, I get better. Was it 5G reception afterwards or something? What do the nanorobots do again? I've forgotten.
My kid has been like dreading about the COVID, and what they're afraid about is just like when the vaccine is available for them because they don't want to get the shot. Especially my second child, Zakira, she's really like doesn't like anybody touching her or anything. It's really hard to just bring her to a clinic, a doctor appointment. She'll fight you to like nail and stuff not to get into the doctor clinic. And I find it's really funny, but I cannot laugh because she's scared. So yeah. They're not looking forward to COVID vaccine for them.
And I figure probably until a certain age.
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say I got my second one last weekend.
Oh, you already like fully vaccinated. Oh, yeah. Awesome. How is it for you, Mehdi? Do you have like a reaction or anything?
Yeah, actually, it was rougher than I expected. Both Mel and I, because like in Georgia, they opened it up to everyone over 16, but we actually went earlier as like caregivers for my parents because they had a qualification where if you're taking care of someone who's over 65, you can qualify. So we did that, and we ended up getting the Pfizer one. We got the second one on Saturday, but it wasn't until I think probably today I'm back to 100%. But so like we got it on Saturday, Sunday and Monday we were in bed. Like Tuesday, actually Monday I did go to, so Saturday, Sunday was like all in bed. Monday I went to my parents' house and played a game of ping pong, and I like couldn't stand up afterwards. I was dizzy and exhausted. So it was like kind of like having the flu, honestly, for like 3 days.
Could you still play video games?
Yes. Yeah. But not a whole lot of them. Like,
is it just the second dose that have that effect, or the first dose is also the same effect?
I think it just probably just depends on the person. Like both of my parents, my dad got the Moderna and his second dose, he was totally fine. And he's like 72, 73. My mom got the Pfizer. She's almost 70 or 70 now, I think. And she was fine after the second dose. So they didn't have any like adverse effects or anything. That's probably just like, it really just depends. I'm wondering actually if I had COVID like last February, because I was sick. I don't know if y'all remember like,
after that Louisiana trip.
Yeah, I've wondered this a lot. I'm like, did I just come into our office with COVID? And like, it wasn't a pandemic yet. Like we were still in the office, but
Mehdi was patient zero for Houston. He brought it from Louisiana.
I may have been. I was like in the tunnels that week and everything.
Yeah, I was like having our last lunch together when you come back. I think we went to Allen Center. Yeah,
and
you're
the thing
still
is, like Amy was sick back then too, and of course we were like, oh my god, this must be COVID, right? But in reality, like there were probably so few people that had made it to Houston. Like we locked it down way too early, and then like unlocked way too early. So we were, while there was still no one spreading it in Houston, we were like in panic mode. And later on, we're like,
I wish I would have done like an antibody test last year just to make sure. Just because like I've heard that the vaccine affects you more adversely if you've had COVID before. So that's like kind of why I was like, is that why I got knocked down for like 2 days or 3 days? But I don't know. Who knows? Like I really don't.
And you had it really bad too, maybe when you had it like
when I was sick
last year. Yeah,
it was awful. I like it was probably the worst I felt from just like what I thought was like a cold ever, because I was like groggy. I couldn't like I didn't come to work for like 3 days, I think, or 2 days, but then when I came I would go home early. I was very dizzy and fatigued, so in hindsight,
sounds like a normal day.
Yeah, right. So yeah, maybe it was just like sprint planning.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that. Like we had a sprint planning, and then Mehdi was just like, really zoned off, and I was like, what happened to Mehdi? And he was like, and then the next week, I think on Monday or like the next day, he was off sick. So yeah.
Yep, I may have been patient zero. Who knows?
So
I don't think I got anyone sick though, at least. But sorry, go ahead.
No,
I was gonna say random tangent because I was just looking at the topic list for today. But Amy, so I've got a splash screen that we don't see it because we're on Zoom, or whatever. I'm gonna share it right now for the channel because for all the viewers that we don't have. But this. I made a beautiful little splash screen that says apparently Steam starting soon. Not stream starting soon. And yeah, I've been using it for weeks and never even looked at it. Like I've looked at this thing, and it's even my Zoom profile picture for work, and people are like, oh yeah, what is this stream starting soon? Like no one seems to realize there's a missing R in the giant capital word Steam.
That's hilarious that it's your screen for work, because it's like, hey, right as I get off this call, I'm gonna start gaming on Steam.
Right, I know. That's probably what they're thinking. They're like, Steam? Like, yeah. So I also made a beautiful little tech power hour splash. So that's what we're showing right now. It's hot pink or something like that. I did tell him about my typo. Yeah. Amy gets full credit for seeing that. She's like, is this supposed to say Steam? I'm like, wait, you're reading this wrong. Oh no, it's me. Okay, so anyway, topics. Random, since we never have topics or agendas, but I'm gonna fire them out there and we'll figure out what to touch on. But besides April Fool jokes, there have been a few good ones I've seen so far. Let's see. Durable objects, that announcement, we have to at least touch on that. Proxies, that's a little bit in the weeds, but a fun little diversion that Mehdi and I have been chasing down this week. Personal projects, why we should do them. Yasirah. And then of course UX, whose responsibility is it? And then how to get Mehdi a job at Netflix. And then all of us, really. Let's just all go to Netflix.
We can spend 45 minutes talking about that last one, and then lightly touch on the other topics.
Okay, cool. I mean, if it gets me a McLaren in the garage, and an eight car garage, which it sounds like it would, then this sounds good. Okay.
Okay, is Netflix a remote?
Isn't that, yeah, it's a good point.
I think Netflix does have a lot of remote roles. I don't know if all of their stuff is remote. Like I think a lot of specifically like UI stuff that I've seen at Netflix, you have to be in California, even if they're not in office right now. But they definitely have some remote roles. I actually saw on Twitter a Netflix opening for like a UI senior software engineer working on notebooks, which I don't know if they're like contributors to open source like notebooks as in like Jupyter notebooks, or I don't know what the ecosystem there is, but either they're open source contributors or they have their own open source like notebook. I'm not 100% sure what that is, but you'd basically be building that. Or you'd be
awesome. It's
yeah,
really
Pretty
cool.
cool, yeah.
which is like a super interesting job. Actually, like one thing that I've thought about a lot is like just trying to think of like where do I want to be in 5 years. Like I kind of really like the idea of, to me, like a potential dream job might be like working on maintaining an open source project as part of like a company that's funding and sponsoring and driving it or maintaining it, right? Like kind of if you think about like Facebook is not great, but working at Facebook on the React team might be kind of cool, those kinds of things.
Right.
I don't know. Seems like an interesting kind of position to be in.
I agree. I mean, it's like Cloudflare, for instance. Like I've had my sights set on Cloudflare. It sounds awesome. But I'm really only watching like the developer tools that they're creating, not like their highly monetized, like, enterprise level DDoS protections and stuff like that. Like their DNS servers, like I could care less about that stuff. But like, the workers, for instance, the durable objects, like these are super exciting things that I'd love to participate in. Like likewise, Facebook. Like when I talked to Facebook a couple, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, whatever, it was clear that they were looking for developers for like their normal software suite, and not, oh, you're going to join the React team. Like that's all I would want to do, right? I want to work on these software like developer tool projects, like to promote and drive the language forward, not just help you sell more ads to people on a dying platform. No offense, Facebook.
It's kind of challenging because those positions I feel like probably are highly coveted and like tend to be very competitive, especially if you're in a role that ends up being like part developer advocacy. You definitely need to have at least like, or maybe not need, but you probably would like to, or be a stronger applicant if you have like a background in developer advocacy or like a very strong presence online or in tech communities, et cetera.
For sure.
To be considered, or to to have a leg up, because probably like the other applicants for that kind of role have that level of standing. But yeah, definitely like more appealing to think about, hey, it would be cool to work at Microsoft on like GitHub code spaces or Visual Studio Code, and not like be in the like Microsoft Azure like meat grinder, or like
Yeah.
Right.
There's different, I mean, there's like one level of like status and accomplishment that you can think of, like for just like working at a company like Microsoft or Google or Netflix or whatever, and that's great. But when I think about like dream jobs, developer tools always like come back to mind, and open source comes back to mind, and those things are
right. So this
probably
actually
on
has
a lot of people's minds.
This has a random segue to something Yasirah and I were talking about earlier, which is about like careers and compensation and stuff like that. I think a lot of companies have the sort of mistaken impression that developers are all out there just seeking jobs. And there are plenty of out-of-work developers, but most people are not looking for those developers. Like some very talented people are out of work too, and like that's always the case. But most of the best, either if they get out of work, they've got another one lined up, or somebody will find them one shortly, whatever. So you typically have to poach the best people. And so like if you're just a random team, a random product that sells something to a random business or whatever, in my opinion, you have to pay even more than the Netflix, the Google, etc. And right now they're paying a lot, right? So they're going to pay a lot. Yeah, they're highly coveted, etc. But again, the top people can ultimately get them with enough work and effort. And it comes with the resume building and brand awareness. You can tell your friends like, hey, I work for Netflix. You lose all that when you work for a random company, just period. So you take random company, you already have to, in a way, pay more to attract them, like good developers to you. Average developers, everyone can find. On top of that, if you're an industry that no one cares about, then you have to pay even more on top of that. It's like, I don't get the brand awareness. And it's an industry that it's like energy these days. That's you're not going to talk at a party and be like, oh, yeah, I work for oil and gas. People are like, ooh, we're going to go over here. We're going to go powder my nose in the bathroom or something like that, right? So you got to pay even more for that. I don't think companies are aware of this. They still think they can get top talent for cheap because everyone's looking for a job. And like, I think we need to educate them to like, no, not everyone's looking for a job. Because I like people like us, like we're looking at the stars, the moon, like this is where we want to go. And not just Microsoft, not just Netflix, but open source within those. Like it's like we're even being picky within this sort of theoretical ideal space. And like those are the things that are going to attract us. I don't know. Kind of a meandering thought, but like it's just, I was like, the companies like that, they need to realize that they're going to have to overpay for equal talent, because it's like they're not just the salary at play here. It's not just dollars to dollars and that's all we care about in the workforce. We care about culture and fit and all that sort of stuff, but we also care about like what it's going to do for our careers. Work for 2 years at Google within one of these developer teams, and like our career propels. Netflix, same thing. Cloudflare, same thing. Like,
But yeah, but also there's other developer though that they can make the job done, but they're not really picky about it, and they're just like, taking it as a job, something that you do to get a money out of it or something, right? Like just a regular
sure.
job. It's not like something that they're really kind of passionate about or really want to make things better or whatever. It's just like job and job and job. They weren't really picky about what it is or what the cost is and stuff.
Sure. I think that part of the problem is not a lot of companies have experienced like what top talent can do. Because if you're in like a market, let's say like Houston, for instance, yeah, we have tons of developers. A lot of them come from enterprise, a lot of them come from CS degrees, etc. But by and large, most of them are, they're not the people that are like following all the Twitter threads. They're not going to the conventions, following the top authors, etc. So like, yeah, they can do the job, but they're not going to be like the pioneers, right? They can like help you propel like your code base and your application and everything else into this sort of the stratosphere. So I feel like unless you've even experienced that, you don't even have the awareness that says, oh wait, here's why this person is typically paid a little bit more, because they can do what the others simply can't. You can't just say, oh cool, well for that salary I can get 2 junior devs and they'll equal this output. Like not even close to the case.
Yeah.
I think, like one thing, it's kind of like, it's a matter of like expectations and reality lining up on both sides. Like, I think one thing, I think what you're talking about, Yasirah, is like obviously perfectly, like it's like a perfectly acceptable thing for someone to do. I don't think,
Sure.
I think the one problem with the industry, right, is like, is that those kinds of expectations of people having like lots of time invested into open source, lots of time invested into personal learning and side projects and those kinds of things. Like those are really, really great things and great ways to accelerate your career. But companies that aren't equipped to hire people who are doing that shouldn't hold everyone to those standards, right? Like they should kind of line their expectations up with the market that is realistic and pragmatic for them to look for employment in, or like look for employees in, right? Look for programmers in, and adjust their expectations accordingly. So like I feel like I saw a lot of that in maybe not a lot, but I saw a little bit of that in Houston, where you'd be interviewing for a company and they expect you to be someone who would be like who would pass a Google interview, right? And what you're applying for is like a job at like an HR company that's like doing just regular, you know, I'm not naming names, but like just regular like kind of development work. And that's okay, right? It's just more of like, it's kind of discouraging for someone who wants a career just being a software developer to then say like, this is the expectation that like you need to have like 10 years of experience with all these different technologies that you'll never use. And you need to pass like, you need to, first thing we're going to ask you to do is invert a binary tree in your interview when all you're going to be doing is like, you know, building React pages or whatever.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think so that actually touches on something. Number one, LinkedIn, which is a dying star, I think, but that's blowing up about that right now, where everyone's complaining that, like, hey, look, there are tons of new developers and developers with 2 or 3 years experience out there looking for work. So why is every job rec asking for senior developer only, right? So I think it's twofold. Number one, yes, you should certainly be aware of the talent pool in your market that's available, et cetera, what they can do, and therefore what you can realistically build, assuming you're not doing remote. However, the flip side is if you need those seniors, like, you know, you're describing these people with their ridiculous job recs, you also have to know your market and realize, like, why would somebody like go for your lower salary than like one of these rockstar positions with all of the credentials they need to get those rockstar positions? Like, they would go there instead. So unless you're overpaying, again, you're not going to lure that talent. So maybe set your bar a little bit lower, or say, that's fine, we need a rockstar for whatever reason, and we're going to pay for them and know the price that comes along with it. And likewise, if the junior developers and the lower, fewer years experience, that's fine too. But don't just think you can kind of like, you know, pile on a whole bunch of those onto a senior developer and multiply productivity. Because really, that's what Yasirah and I were talking about.
For me, like,
yeah, like,
yeah.
Like you can't just say, okay, great senior developer, you're architecting this just fine, but you know it's a little slow. We need to accelerate this. We'll give you a junior developer to take on the sort of the grunt tasks or like the lower level tasks until you can mentor them and get them to the right speed. Mentorship's great, but that's an investment. So number one, you're slowing down your top developers or whoever's going to mentor them just naturally. Even just for any time they're spending walking them through the system, PRs, peer reviews, etc. That's slowing them down. And secondly, when you have to like redo some of their code, that's even worse. And that's like that's built in. So it's not going to accelerate you, and not for a really long time. It's going to completely decelerate you, and it's a long-term investment. You say, cool, we're doing this for the right reasons. We're going to mentor the people, give them some chances, opportunities, but you can't just say, oh, you'll mentor them for 3 or 4 weeks, and then you can hand them a huge feature and good luck. Like, you'll be paying that tech debt forever, and you're going to be making your senior developers like want to shoot themselves. While they're like, oh my God, like, how do I even begin to correct this or steer this ship? Like, so yeah, it's just false expectations from product where they're like, oh, we can just accelerate this by throwing a whole bunch of manual labor at it, basically.
Was that your experience with me, Mehdi? I hope not.
No, not at all. Like that's like, if I were to, anytime I have conversations about like, I talk about you a lot, and you probably a lot more than you know, and you're like you're the one exception in my short career so far where I'm like, she was getting underpaid, she was underleveled, and she is like just blew away all the expectations. But that's like a scenario that we were worried about, I think, right? And like, I think that's like, not with you in particular, because just like you interviewed so well, like you just were super impressive right off the bat. But in general, I agree with what Kevin is saying from a business building perspective. I think like if you're planning your headcount or whatever, and like that's your approach to accelerating a product development cycle that you think needs to go faster, then like the book is already written. I mean, like more often than not, like you're probably already in a hole that you can't get yourself out of. And like it might be the case that like in our case it was actually a bit different because neither of us were really like that person that's the company is investing a ton of money into anyway. But you might want to ask yourself, like, is it worth it for us to go and try to match or exceed compensation from a bigger company with a lot more resources to get something we think we need, even though it might be better if we just adjust our expectations for our business, accept that, like we don't necessarily need like a person who is a superstar or whatever you envision someone being a 10x developer is. And we just need to build a team of reliable seniors or experienced people, provide a framework for developing more junior or less experienced people, not put too much on them, and accept the most pragmatic, like life, their timeline or product development cycle for you, and just say like, this is the healthy way to build a business.
Sure.
There's no magic bullet, right?
Yeah.
So
I like
that's kind
that.
of my take.
But it has to come with the expectations, like the realistic expectations of what you can do and what you can't do, right? So if you say, look, we can't afford these rock stars, right? The Bay Area is trying to poach them for 3 times what we can pay. So we simply can't do that. That's fine, right? But you can't expect like to move like faster than the prototype phase in that early growth phase of, okay, let's pull on a second and third and fourth, whatever junior developer to kind of like help offload some of this stuff. Like it's going to all slow down. And they have to understand that and welcome it and say, this is like the natural progression of app development. Like nothing moves as fast as a napkin sketch, right? There's no complexity built in there. So you can rip pieces out, put them back in. There's no clients and customers using it. So again, it's easy to just change things so fast. And they see that pace and they assume that, well, with more people, it will be even faster. No, I mean, as the thing hardens, as we've talked about in previous weeks, like Facebook, for instance, as that platform hardens or React, you can no longer move as quickly. Everything becomes much more deliberate, much more tested. And I mean, like, even if you were to pull in like a senior developer, like just kind of random tangent on this one, if you were to pull in a senior developer, like a true rock star, they're not going to hit the ground running and like committing amazing features on day one either, because they still have to become familiar with your code base. They're not going to want to step on toes. They're going to be like, oof, like, and in theory, if they're better than you are, they're going to look at your code like, what the fuck did this person write? Like, this is trash. And how do I delicately say, hey, we could do this better? And they're doing that to your code, right? And that's normal. But it's going to take time. Like, I got into Arundo, for instance, and like, there was some really complex code, and it wasn't poorly written. It was just, I felt it was overly complex, but like, it was also pretty impressive what it did. And I'm like, I don't know what I can safely touch in any of this stuff, because it's not done at all in the way that I would do it. And so you have to tiptoe around while you figure out what you can touch, what you can't touch. And that's natural. And that's like it's a good developer. I mean, I'm at least okay. So imagine a junior developer or like a 1 or 2 years in, they're being dropped into a code base and saying, hey, here's a feature, run with it. You understand GitHub and PRs, right? You're good.
Yeah. You have the skills. Like I saw on your resume, you have this on your checklist of skills. Like, so you should be able to deliver this in 2 months, right? Or like a month or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, like, yeah, enough said.
Yeah. I think I run into that again and again where they think they can headcounts like solve the problem. And you can eventually, I think, kind of. But like it comes with so many prices you pay up front, and they have to be aware of that. Like, and all of it's really slowness. Like you're long-term investing in acceleration, but you're gonna
it's
grind to
also
a halt.
like funny, like a headcount. I was like in a position where we need help for example in the front end, right? Why not adding front end, so that we need help on the front end because we have this backlog of feature that we need to deliver. But it's not just front end work. It's not that you can do it purely front end without the support of other developer on the back end, on the services on other part, right? Like, so adding more to the front end and then working that simultaneously or in parallel, that also puts stress on the other supporting developer, right? Like, now they have to work on 2 features in parallel instead of just one, and that is not fair for them either. And so head count is it's tough, unless, I don't know, you can do feature like of end to end just by yourself, without having other developer helping you, and that's mostly not possible.
All right. So moral of the story, like engineering leads or whatever, and product teams, fix your shit. Okay. So with that, it's actually a pretty good segue to who's responsible for the UX, since that was brought up.
Mehdi does.
And he's responsible for the UX. All right. I like that.
All the UX.
So yeah, some background to this.
Oh, were you?
No, go ahead. No, you.
Oh, okay. So I guess like I don't know the full background on the topic. I guess like the idea is UX. Okay, so let's like actually break down what UX is, right? User experience, and probably like I could probably say pretty confidently like anyone who's worked on a business to consumer product or even a business to business product that lots of people are expected to use may have like empathy for the user or keeping the user front and center or like paying attention to the user as part of the company values or like principles for building a product, right? Like that's a common thing you see. So so we had a topic for a discussion today, which is whose responsibility is UX? And I think the naive answer there would be, well, like the UX designer is responsible for the UX. I will kick off the conversation by saying I think it's everyone's responsibility. I think if you're delivering a product that is a business to consumer product, especially, and your goals are to get your users to pay for your product, then it is in everyone's interest to have UX in mind, specifically on the product development team. So like your product people, your designers, your engineers, your QAs, your technical writers, your support folks, because that's where the money comes from. And like in a business, that's the part that everyone should pay the most attention to in a purely business sense, I think.
I'm gonna pile onto that one and say that it doesn't just matter for B2C. It matters for B2B, developer to developer. Like literally, whoever is consuming your product is a consumer by nature. Whether it's a business, a developer, a, normal retail consumer, whatever. So I think it matters. Period. Like if we're selling to a customer, like another business, it's how well can they use it? Is it intuitive? If I can make a feature in a way that can explain itself, so I don't have to write a support manual for it or answer like help tickets, like that's just better, right? I interpreted the question from Yasirah as like, and I think there's like a lot of turf war over this kind of stuff, right? If you have a dedicated UX team or UI designer, a lot of them think like, hey, this is my turf. You stay out of it, right? So I handle UX, or maybe the product says you handle UX. That's why we hired you. I would agree 100% with what Mehdi said, that it's everyone's responsibility, which means you need to value everyone's input. Engineers are literally the people building it, which means they're clicking on things. They're interacting with things day in and day out. They also make terrible assumptions that like, users understand what they know, which is bad. But they have a little bit more hands-on, like the tactile feedback of this app than any Photoshop or abstract mock or whatever else, that a designer is looking at. And so I think to devalue the engineers is a huge misstep. And then also, I don't think engineers can afford to just sort of kick the bucket and say, hey, look, it's your job. You deal with that crap. I'm just going to code. Like that's crap too. Like we have to always be thinking of, does this make sense? Is there a better way? Don't just follow blindly the mocks and say, oh, you gave this to me, I gave it back to you pixel perfect, but I ignored all reason or accountability along the way.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think like that it is like everybody responsibility to understand what we're building, who the user is, and how they're using the application, right? But then like it's just like weird when in a team we have like UX designer or UX lead or something like that. It's not like in my team in general, right? Like a team
Sure.
will have the UX designer. Then like isn't that their responsibility then to handle that?
I think it always goes back to kind of trust, right? If I would love to have, number one, like I can graphic design, I can UX design, I can develop, I can literally do any of these tasks to varying degrees of success. I want to be able to trust that you're going to do all these tasks, individually better than me, right? So the UX person will do UX better than I will. the UI designer will create a better interface than I will. If I can find another developer, that the developer will code circles around me. Like this is when you can just say, great, I can just trust you. And I don't have to think, right? I can just sort of stay in my lane and trust that this is going to be an amazing product. The reality is we don't typically have that in most companies unless you just work for like the dream product.
Yeah.
And that's where people do have to lean on each other and trust each other and not just sort of stay in their lane. Because if you do that, you're going to have a very fragmented product where just things just don't make sense.
Yeah.
And so like, you know, anecdotally, we saw that in some previous teams in Arundo, for instance, where turf wars became like the sort of the de facto. And because of that, people literally stayed in their lane just to sort of stay out of trouble. And it created things that didn't make sense because you didn't have a lot of like collaboration.
One thing I'll say about the like lead role specifically, as it pertains to UX, but also more generally, is like, I don't know if I actually did this at Arundo. I hope I did. But one thing I've learned really, especially over the last year, is my role as a lead isn't to really be responsible for any specific thing. It's more of like being accountable for something. So let me kind of explain what that means. So like as a tech lead or an engineering lead, if something doesn't go well within my team that has to do with like technical implementation or with engineering, it's kind of my role to be accountable for it, like be held accountable for it, but also be accountable for figuring it out. But I don't really think the answer comes from me. I think my role there is just to make sure that the answer comes from everyone, if that makes sense. So like as a lead, what I at least strive to do is like say, what is the problem? How does it relate to engineering? Like who are all the people, engineers and otherwise, who would have something to say about this? Let me go source opinions from them, synthesize it in a way that's easily communicated out of engineering, and then like do that communication. So I think maybe like I would think of like a UX lead as a similar thing, where UX has a lot of different components. It could be a lot of them are very deeply intertwined with engineering, such as like very browser specific, code specific accessibility stuff, screen reader accessibility, those kinds of things that engineers tend to be more trained on than designers. And also has to do with things like loading states and technical implementation that might affect user experience, so needing to mitigate those, etc. Also has to do with copy and technical writing and making sure we're using the right language and tone, and that has to do with like content marketing, content writing, those kinds of things. So like it's really kind of all inclusive. The UX lead role in my mind would be then someone whose job it is to synthesize all that and make sure the right voices are in the room to share their perspectives. Because like different people are going to have different expertise levels. Someone from customer support is going to literally have been the closest to the user and have seen them struggle with a thing, and they would probably have like the most valuable input even when it comes to defining a better user experience. So I don't know, like I would hope that I think in a high functioning team, that kind of decision making isn't adversarial, and it's kind of like it's not a surprise to anyone. It's just like, hey, we all sat in a room and talked about it and shared our perspectives, and the lead is the one who is synthesizing and finding a good middle ground and saying like, this is our group decision. Or at least that's how I like to approach that kind of thing for when it pertains to engineering.
And then you have small pet projects that absolutely don't have UX roles, and you're like, all right, you get to do everything.
That's it.
That's also like the thing, like, right? Like if your team is small enough, you don't even have a UI designer or UX designer. So how is that role is being delegated to the team member?
Right. So let's just take that scenario. Okay.
I think would it go to the front end engineer then, because that's more user facing or something?
I think so. If you ripped out UX, like is the company or product is too small to have it. But let's just say you have a product person, like the product visionary, and that could be an engineer, that can be the founder of the company, it can be an actual dedicated product person, whatever. And you have an engineer that's, let's just say full stack, they're just developing the thing. Right. So in that scenario, who's it go to? Is it more product and their responsibility, or is it more the engineer? And again, I think it should be collaboration, and it should be like, ideally your product person would more or less be like the user experience, because they're the one that's kind of capturing the vision and the journey of the consumer through the application, through solving the problem, really, even beyond just the application. But in reality, that's oftentimes not the case. A lot of times they're spread too thin, trying to capture market, trying to capture contracts, even finding the users in the first place. And so what you can be doing as the engineering is scrambling to keep up and try to make that experience, if nothing else, make that experience as straightforward and painless as possible, because it's going to make it easier to sell. And number two, easier for you as a lazy developer to not have to write documentation and create help guides around things. And this, you're talking about the weed stuff, like accessibility and all that sort of stuff. That's a little different, and I think that's absolutely more on the engineering side, because like product is probably not going to bring up, hey, is it compatible with screen readers, for instance? That was a good point. Like,
yeah, it might also be like, in a small team. Like, I think this is actually exactly what Kevin said, but it's like, if we take an example of like a restaurant delivery admin backend, right? Like, you might find that your who knows, like maybe you're someone on the team who has, maybe one of your QA engineers used to own a restaurant, and they happen to be like more of a subject matter expert. Like, listen to that person.
Yeah, of course.
So it kind of depends. On smaller teams, I think a lot of those norms kind of go out the window. So it really, you're like relying on as much past experience and subject matter expertise as you can. Or if it's a side project, like maybe you just have to, if you're the only person, you just maybe have to do a lot of Wikipedia and learning research.
Oh man.
But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of how I feel about it. Like, aside from the technical stuff, like color contrast and accessibility for screen readers and all those kinds of things, where like those are very specific, problems for specific disciplines, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And then luckily there are tools like Lighthouse to guide us through it. For those perfect Lighthouse scores.
I saw, I haven't actually, I saw on Twitter, I didn't play with it, but there was like a Twitter post that I saw that was like the most inaccessible perfect Lighthouse score website possible. And I think it was just like an example of how you could get like hundreds across the board on Lighthouse, but have like an extremely inaccessible website, which is like, you'd have to be trying to do that. Lighthouse is like pretty good, I think, for a lot of like, I mean, definitely a good start compared to not doing it. But it was just funny. It was just interesting.
Yeah.
I've been doing training for, I've been working a little bit. I actually paused on this. I need to continue, but trying to get my web accessibility specialist certification. It's interesting.
From where, maybe?
From DQ University. I'll drop a link in the chat.
Question, why?
DQ. Just out of interest. Like, it was something that I thought I needed a little bit. I needed to go through a course, not because of the certification. It was just kind of a side effect of it. But to get a sense for, like, one thing that I really want to improve on is strategies for like testing for accessibility beyond the basics. So like figuring out how people use software. This becomes more important, I guess, if you're doing B2C stuff and you don't have like as niche of an audience. But mainly just because of interest in wanting to know, like wanting to be aware of how different people use computers and like how doing X or Y thing might impact people. Like, I'm definitely an advocate of like, you definitely don't need to optimize for the broadest experience possible in every possible scenario. Like Slick, for example, is a very specialized app, maybe not super specialized, but it's like a somewhat specialized app that it's deeply intertwined with photos and imagery, right? And there's only so much you can do to make essentially an art gallery or photo gallery accessible to people who can't see, for example, right?
Right.
So there's obviously like you need to use discretion and stuff, but it's the course so far is pretty interesting, learning about just like different ways of using computers and
Yeah,
like I don't think like saying, hey, we just need to hit AA on every single
sure.
web content accessibility guideline, and then we'll call it a day is like a good answer in every case. But I don't know, just interesting.
Yeah, so 2 points on that. Number one, I certainly agree that I think it's a kind of a misstep for people that say, for instance, obsess about accessibility to go down every edge case, because like there's a time and place for chasing every edge case, and oftentimes it's never. We have to do the broad strokes. They're going to cover the biggest blanket, help the most people with the least amount of effort, because we have limited resources, which is ourselves and time and money. And then the other thing that I liked about what you said is that you're not there for the certification. And I think that's an important message to kind of send across. A lot of people these days, I think that they need the certification to get the job. And certain jobs will require certifications. I would typically argue from the sort of biased and opinionated perspective that those are the wrong jobs. But you doing that to learn is the important thing. And I think we should always be like training it. We say, hey, look, there's a gap. We can understand this arena better, so that to make my life easier, to make the consumer's life easier or better. We should absolutely do that. And if certifications are the easiest way to get that, then by all means. But the little certification stamp on your LinkedIn profile or whatever should not be the motivation, because like if you're looking for like, and again, I think it depends on what you're doing. If you're just looking for a career, just looking for a job that pays the bills, yeah, those certifications may totally help you. Find one of those jobs that actually cares about that stuff. But in our field, it's more about what you can build and less about like, stamps after your name. Another link.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say like this course that I linked it actually doesn't give you the certification. The certification would have to come from like the IAAP, which is like a separate organization. So this is like a curriculum that trains you for it. I might not even do the certification exam personally. The only reason I would is because my employer would pay for it. But it might not be like really worth the time, because I think the cost of it is equal to the cost of the prep course, which my employer is also paying for. I'd much rather do the prep course and then spend that money doing a workshop with Marcy Sutton or someone else who's like really, really like a boss on accessibility, than to chase the certification, honestly. But I think the curriculum is cool just because you learn a lot. So,
well, as you take it, teach us some things and share it with the channel, because why not? Yeah, that's pretty cool though.
Yep.
If there's an automated way to like check for contrast, like that's my biggest one, because I always pick colors that are anti-contrast, because they're more subtle, they blend a bit better. Of course, they fail like every reader accessibility challenge ever. Then I have to go and fix my lighthouse scores again.
Yeah, I think color contrast is one that you can automate for sure. I know we have at work, we have like a dev tool that runs in our dev instance, like local dev environment, that's checking for color contrast and like fires warnings in your console if you have low contrast and stuff like that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I know like DQ, the company that I linked, they also have a tool called Axe. I'm not sure how robust it is, but it's like an automated accessibility checking tool. Yeah, those things like it's color contrast you can check for just mathematically. But even then, things like color blindness you have to be aware of, and so like color combinations, those things, like it gets pretty complicated, and not only does it get complicated and ambiguous, but so oftentimes there's no perfect solution, like especially with data viz and you needing to display like 7 or 8 different data labels on a chart. There's no possible way you're going to find colors that are going to be like completely easily distinguishable from one another for someone who's colorblind.
Right.
But you can make an attempt and like get close to something there's definitely situations that you don't want to get into, and those are somewhat easily avoidable. And then everything else is kind of a gray area.
Yeah, I remember taking the data visualization classes, and we talk about that, picking colors for your chart, for your heat map or your map and stuff, right? So the colorblind can easily differentiate between things. Mm-hmm.
So
you can simulate that in DevTools also.
What is it?
I think you can simulate different types of color blindness in I know for a fact you can do it in Firefox's DevTools. I don't know if you can do it in Chrome, but
I
Oh,
seem to recall
awesome.
seeing this at some point in the DevTools because I like to poke around every now and then. It probably exists. But okay, so real quick before I forget, Yasirah, you touched on data viz. I know that was just sort of a way to lead up to like accessibility around data viz. But here's just a message to all employers. Like data viz, I feel like is its own dark art. And I feel like, yes, while we can all sort of make kind of useful charts and graphs and kind of pretty charts and graphs, like a real expert data viz person should be able to deliver us and make us intuit data from a graph in a way that we simply can't come up with our own because we're still used to like bar chart, pie chart, and like
Yeah.
we don't think of it in the same sort of way. And like having spent so many years now in data viz, like I'm still like absolute freaking neophyte layman, like a person that actually had real experience in organizing and displaying data would run circles around me. And those people should be hired when data viz is your game. Like, don't just ask engineers to come up with the best thing they can come up with. Unless it's just a time series, in which case that's fine. We can all do that. I don't know.
there's
Random tangent.
Database
No, I agree with
is
it.
really, yeah.
It's like
Good.
people make
I
careers
think
around
my
this for
internet
good
is,
reason.
is kind of. Is it just me or everything is kind of lagging?
You seem fine to me.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not even gonna. We only have a few minutes. I'm not even gonna talk about proxies. Besides the fact that proxies are awesome in JavaScript. Mehdi, thank you for opening my eyes to that world of that dark art of proxy hell. Incredible what we can do with that. So like ID router is built just simply around a proxy, which allows us to dynamically listen to props or dynamically set props and things like that. And then we've been able to create super powerful middleware around proxying elements within that router itself. So just proxy upon proxy upon proxy. And it's like unbelievable. Is that the equivalent these days of like true observables in JavaScript since object.watch or whatever was deprecated? Do you know, Mehdi? I mean,
I know a lot of observable libraries are implemented using proxies. So like if you like use Vue.js, like Vue.js's two-way binding, I believe, is implemented using proxies. MobX is implemented using proxies. So like a lot of these, like there's I think more to observables because like there's like a specific interface that observables implement. Like if you look at RxJS observable, there's like a specific, like you need to expose like a subscribe method, and like JavaScript observables are kind of like the whole ecosystem at this point. But yeah, like all the observable libraries, I don't know about RxJS, but definitely MobX that we use quite heavily, Yasirah, and Kevin too. Like that's all implemented using proxies, which is what lets MobX know when you do like foo.bar equals 123 and it'll re-render your React component or whatever.
right. Like
which is cool.
I literally, I've been creating CMSs for many years now at this point, and like I'm gonna have to rewrite them, of course, knowing this power, because it's like I'm tired of like having these little setter functions or update functions on the object itself that then of course does the dirty checks and all that sort of crap when I could just be watching it via a proxy. I loved back in the day with Angular 1.x, for instance, the two-way data binding magic where you could literally just point it at a model, an object somewhere, in JavaScript land, and as you updated it, the UI updated. Trying to do the same sort of thing that MobX is now doing, although at that point it didn't even require some of the extra boilerplate that MobX does require, like binding it to React, for instance. Yeah, I need to, and like I think Svelte does that sort of thing too, obviously in a very different way, but like there is no I need to bind this to a piece of DOM sort of thing. It's just I'm just updating a value and it all just works.
Yeah, the cool thing about Svelte is I think that's done at like compile time. So it'll like under the hood, all it's doing is like basically emitting JavaScript that'll re-render on a set or something. I mean, like I guess you could also like, I guess the simplest way you could do two-way binding would be to just implement like a getter and a setter on a property and do like document.innerHTML equals whatever on your set.
Yeah.
But a proxy is like kind of you're doing the same thing with a proxy. You're just wrapping it with another object, so it's less, it's more abstract, which is great. You could say, let me just wrap this object with a proxy that will just automatically call some callback when something is updated. And then you can just do that with any object instead of having to implement like a custom setter on every object that you use, I guess. But
yeah. I will literally be injecting
it
throughout all my patterns from here on out. Like once you understand the kind of slightly weird syntax of it, it's pretty simple. Like it's a simple interface, but just so much power.
I wish Trevor was on this call because he would tell you to go down a rabbit hole of functional reactive programming in RxJS, because that's a whole universe, and that's all based on this kind of like this observable pattern and like subscribing to changes on an observable object and like reacting to it and doing stuff and using functional patterns like defining a data pipeline for your subscription, like maps and reduces.
Which I like. And I like functional programming, to be honest, but
Yep.
I was under the understanding, and this is having not used RxJS, just reading the docs and sort of fantasizing about one day using them. I did a couple like little demo scripts, right? Also the understanding that it's mostly for streams of events, streams of data, streams of things happening, right? Not just a single thing. Is that correct? Or
not
is
necessarily.
That
I think you could use it in both cases. I think streams of data are a really good way of using RxJS, like a really natural fit, but by no means, like from what I know, I have a very limited understanding of RxJS. Also, like I haven't built any projects with it. I've just watched a couple talks, experimented a little bit, but you can absolutely use it for, I think you might find it a little bit indirect to use it for something like local component state, for example, or like basic UI state. But for any kind of rapidly updating data or data that multiple actors need to subscribe to changes from, or data that needs to be transformed when like prior to alerting subscribers, it becomes handy from what I know. So like streams are a really good use case for it, but definitely not the only one.
Okay, I was just curious. RxJS only 11K.
It's kind of inverted though compared to like what we're used to in like React world. I think it's a little bit of like an inverse mental flow to like understand your code, I think, which once it clicks, I would imagine it would probably make a lot of sense, but I don't know. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting model.
That like gives me promise though, because like, and like honestly, our last couple weeks of conversations, like with Trevor, for instance, like have really like kind of raised awareness back in my head, like that React, like, I don't think we're there yet, Angular in a lot of ways felt like a better, like this is Angular 1X, Angular JS, felt like a better development experience than React does. Now, like React is really cool and I love component design and things like that. And I think Vue like also tackles that in a very sort of encapsulated way, which is perfect because I ended up using a lot of directives in Angular, which it's a component, has business logic built into it, etc. But the data binding itself, like the state management I felt so much more powerful and intuitive via that two-way data binding, that sort of auto magic sort of thing. It had its own tricks and caveats, but like we jumped through a lot of hoops to make that crap work in React in a way that like a new developer, like I don't think it's just a naturally intuitive pattern, like none of it. Hooks included, like hooks are a great breath of fresh air for us that had to deal with, ES6 set state and or like, Redux boilerplate or stuff like that. But like it's coming from that, it was wonderful, but coming from a blank slate, you'd be like, what the hell is this crap? So I don't know. That's why I'm actually really excited about things like Svelte. Vue, I still not on board with, because I just don't like the syntax of the interface. sort of boilerplate style of it. But like I just want that sort of perfectly decoupled. Like I can just use objects and just point them into or pass them to my props, and it all just sort of works. I don't have to worry about state flow or triggering state flow or figuring out some sort of way to get React to see the changes internal to those objects.
Will we ever get there?
I don't know. I'm going to trust you to raise my awareness to whatever library gets there first, because you're going to know it way before I do. That's for sure. All right, durable objects. Who's going to play with them? Who's signed up?
Not me. Not yet.
You got to pay for a workers bundle. It's just $5 a month, but that's so cheap.
Oh, okay. You have to pay for that before you can play with a durable object?
Correct. It's open beta as long as you are subscribed to the workers bundle plan or whatever it's called. Workers Unlimited or something like, I'm not sure. Anyway, there's a free plan for workers, and then there's a $5 a month plan. And if you're like super popular, that $5 a month will scale. So probably like $5.20 or something ridiculous. But workers is dirt cheap.
I was looking at the durable objects pricing also. It looked super cheap. So I'm probably going to check it out at some point. I'm excited for it.
There was some discussion on the Cloudflare Discord about the pricing, trying to like understand like how they've done their pricing model. I haven't looked at it in depth. I know that they're like, hey, look, it's free for now, but we're gonna have to charge for this, like in addition to, which I get. It's it's backed by storage. It's more compute time. There's some discussion on the Discord about like, what do you do in a socket scenario, right? If there's a socket dialogue back and forth on this durable object, and the worker, like, are you paying for the entire compute time that this thing is awake, more or less? It's a little different than like a worker where you were literally paying for the compute time alone, not the time that the worker executed. So like, you fire a worker and it has like a 5-second async call in there and then responds. Like, you're not paying for 5 seconds, you're paying for the compute time, which is probably like 10 milliseconds or 15 milliseconds. So I don't know how that's going to work. I'm very curious. But I meant to do it yesterday, but then actually like stayed up late working on work.
Yeah,
as luck would have it. Or yeah. And then like finally publishing the IDI stuff to get ready for the next round of that. But
on that note, I think it's time for work. I gotta go.
Yeah, it's 1:00. All right, well, we gotta wrap it up.
Yep.
Well, it's been fun, guys.
Fun chat. Yeah, as always.
Yep.
Catch you next week.
See you next week.
All right. Bye.
Later.
Later.